Welcome to your Inside Track to Success. I will be your host today. My name is Jennifer Johnson Kraintz. And for those of you that are regular listeners, or maybe even tuning in for the first time, expecting to hear a man's voice, you might be a little bit confused. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jennifer and I am Stu's wife. And together we had this brilliant idea that in order to celebrate his 100th episode, pause for reaction, for his 100th episode, it would be great for him to be on the other side of the microphone where he gets to be interviewed and share everything that he's learned over the course of this past year. And so, again, this is in honor of 100 episodes and also coming up on 2 years, which is such a huge accomplishment. And so I don't want to speak any more about that. I know you're here to hear from Stu. So, Stu, welcome to your own show.
Thanks, babe. I appreciate it. I'm super excited to be on the other side of the desk, so to speak. And, more importantly, I'm really excited to celebrate 100 episodes. This has been quite the journey. The show launched on March 1st, 2023. And, as we are recording this, it's mid-January 2025. And I can't believe we're already this far into the show. We've had a lot of amazing guests, a lot of great insights, and appreciate everybody who has been along for the journey up to this point, or maybe this is just their entry point to the show. But it's been a heck of a ride, and I want to also thank you for being a huge part of it as we've gotten it up off the ground.
Yeah, of course. It's been really cool to watch you create this from my perspective. That's been really awesome. So, okay. All right. I think that probably the biggest question that myself and probably, your listeners would want to know is what's the biggest lesson that you've taken away from 100 episodes of podcasts, from nearly 2 years, from everything, right? From finding the guests to interviewing the guests to editing the episodes to bringing out the energy that maybe didn't already exist. Like, this is not just pushing play and you start talking. There's so much that goes into it. And above and beyond just it being a podcast, there's so many life lessons. And so I'm really curious, what's the biggest lesson that you've walked away from the past 100 episodes?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I could spend the next hour just answering this question. And I think the biggest nuggets that I've taken away from the show so far is y'all, if you have a goal, if you have a dream, if you have an inkling that there is something that you want to do with your life that isn't the prescriptive get a job, find your person, have some kids, maybe get a dog along the way, and then work until you retire and you're done. Like, I encourage you to just jump in 2 feet first, be brave enough to suck at something new. I think is really key, actually, because I really didn't know what I was doing. Like, I had been listening to podcasts since I discovered the School of Greatness podcast by Lewis Howes way back in 2017. And so having my own show had been a dream of mine for quite some time. I mean, we're talking at least 6 years by the time I finally hit record for the first time. And I think anybody would tell you episodes 1 through 10 are nowhere near as high quality as the latter half of what I've put out. And it couldn't have been possible if I didn't just decide I'm doing this. And it took a lot of support. It took a lot of people pushing me. It took a lot of people pouring into me to stop giving into my own excuses every single
Mhm.
day, to stop giving into my stories as to why I couldn't actually have the podcast or why I
Mhm.
couldn't
Mhm.
make an impact in the world. And here I am. We're just getting started, but just seeing how much the show has grown in terms of listenership, but also just like the DMs I'll get from people saying like, "Hey, that episode really made a difference," or "That guest you had on said something super profound." That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is for the people, to support them in creating the lives of their dreams, because we only get
Mhm.
one crack at this. And
Yeah.
I think, to put a bow on this point, theoretically all goes well, I'm going to live a very long life. Do I want to be able to look people in the eye and say I went for it? Or do I want to be looking people in the eye 40 years down the line and saying, man, I wish I started the podcast?
Yeah. Yeah. So is that your biggest nugget? Your biggest lesson?
That's the biggest one to start with for
Yeah.
sure, because everybody listening to this has the thing. Like,
Sure.
I want to acknowledge you, because not only are you my wife and you're amazing, but y'all, if you didn't know, she's actually my most listened to guest on any of my episodes. Go back to episode number 7. It's an amazing one. It's the most listened to episode in this show's history. But you wanted to start retreats in your coaching business, and you're doing them and you're selling them out, and that started somewhere. So I'm showing up for the people that have the goal, have the dream, but are afraid to maybe take that first step. I know people that have gotten into foster parenting. I know people that are writing the manuscript for their first book. I know people that have lost weight. I know people that have quit smoking. I know people that are planning the trip, like the vacation of their dreams, after years and years of saying that, oh, this isn't for them. Like, be brave enough to do the thing and to take the action, and keep showing up for yourself each and every day. I
Mhm.
think that there's a great book called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Mhm.
For those of you that are unfamiliar with Paulo, um, his books are works of fiction, but they are very directly tied into the human experience, what it's like to be a human being. And The Alchemist is all about following your dreams. And
Mm.
he calls it your personal legend. But in the book, there's a piece that always sticks out to me: how when we start on a path towards a bigger goal, when we finally plant our flag and we start taking that action, like, yes, we're doing this thing, God, the universe, whoever you ascribe it to,
Mhm.
starts to conspire in your favor.
Mhm.
In the book, he calls it beginner's luck. But things start to unfold for you when you make that declaration and back it up with that strong, committed action. And
Mhm.
you're going to hit what's called the dip, where suddenly the motivation wears off. Suddenly it might not be as exciting as it was when you first got started. But when you push through that, like, no shit,
Mhm.
that's when you actually start to grow. That's when you start to really create magic for yourself. And
Mhm.
I think that in sticking to this for 2 years, in sticking to this through 100 episodes, I've learned so much about myself. For all the times I've looked myself in the mirror, like, hey, I thought that episode was going to do great and nobody listened to it. Or, wow, I was really excited to get this person on my show, and then they no showed the recording time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those are all places I would have normally stopped in the past. I would have thrown in the towel. I would have beat myself up. So many of us do that, where we just crumble or fold at the first sign of resistance.
Mhm.
But continuing to push through each and every day is how you actually get to the big life changing or life defining goals.
I'm hearing a lot in what you're sharing. One is I'm hearing a lot of encouragement and advice around just to get started and to just push through the dips that you're going to face, the challenges that you're going to face, but also the knowing that the universe, that God, that source is, conspiring in your favor. How do you apply all of that to one nugget of wisdom that if your listeners walked away from this episode and heard nothing else, they would hear this one thing?
That's such a beautiful question. I think the big thing is that God wants you to succeed and he
Mhm.
delights in granting your desire. The caveat to that is you get to show up and do the work.
Yeah,
It's the old adage of if you're praying for a hole in the ground, God might not give you the hole, but he will give you the shovel,
right.
right? And I think the intersection is no matter what your goal is, no matter what your dreams are,
Hmm.
you get to show up and from a place of responsibility, not only to yourself, but to the people in your life that may or may not be counting on you, to the people, especially that are going to love you and support you no matter what. You owe it to yourself and to your creator to show up each and every day to do the work
Yeah. Yeah.
and watch how it unfolds for you.
Hmm.
Watch how, when you show up with that level of commitment, how things that might seem like just luck or divine intervention unfold themselves for you to conspire in your favor as you're
Yeah.
getting going on your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I said this in actually maybe the episode that you're referring to, but that calling was placed on your heart for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, don't we just make it harder by resisting that than actually just going for it?
Yeah.
And I can think of so many times in my own life where I'm like, wow, like going back to college for me, wow, I really did just spend the last 20 years resisting it. But then actually making the choice and doing it and stepping into it was so much easier than the previous 20 years that I had spent
Yeah.
telling myself all the reasons I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that's a huge example, but even
Yeah.
just with this show, all I had to do was have a paid Zoom account and a decent microphone that actually wasn't all that expensive, and I was ready to go and hit record. Like
Hmm.
obviously there are things that we refine upon as we get more and more acclimated, become better and better experts at what it is that we're up to,
Yeah.
but you know, I could have started the podcast back in 2017 when I had the inkling to do so. And,
Hmm.
you know, it goes back to the point I made earlier. Like, if we're all going to be 75 years old someday, don't we want to be 75 years old having
Right.
said we done the thing?
Right. Yeah. I remember having that conversation with my girlfriend when I was talking about going back to school. And I said, I'm going to be 50 years old by the time I graduate. And she said, you might be, but you're going to be 50 years old one day anyway. So do you want to be 50 years old and saying that you got your college degree, or do you want to be 50 years old and be in the same spot that you are now?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that was some good advice because it's so true. And I think about all the areas where we could take that and apply that, especially with time, really truly even with finances.
Hmm.
It's going to be so expensive to get started. It may cost you money to get started, and you may really be struggling financially right now. But if you never step into it, if you never take that chance, you may always be in this financial struggle right now.
Yep.
But if you take the leap of faith, if you follow that calling, if partner with your source, let the universe conspire in your favor
Yeah.
and let yourself be shocked and surprised. Like, I remember when you started this, and I remember how you were putting it off until May and you were challenged just to start right now.
Yep.
And here we are, 100 episodes, 2 years, and how many downloads later?
We just surpassed 5,000, which I'm pretty excited about.
Oh, 5,000. That's so exciting. Oh, so good. I think one of the things that I've really seen in you over the past 2 years is how your confidence has raised in many areas, but specifically in your interviews and with the people that you're asking and with the questions that you're asking. You know, to your point, your first 10 episodes were perfectly lovely and they are very different from where you are now. What would you say was the contributing factor to just the rise in your confidence, both within the container of this podcast and also outside of it?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean that's the crux of everything I do as a coach is
Mm.
we build self-confidence by keeping our promises to ourselves, but only if we acknowledge ourselves for what we're up to. And
Mhm.
that's not just a corny thing that I say. Like it's actually how you become a more confident human being. And so
Mhm.
I think to kind of draw a through line here, we've talked already today about getting started on whatever the thing
Mhm.
is. I just hit record with whoever my guest was, and I just put it up to God that whoever was going to hear this was meant to hear it and they were going to be impacted. Whoever was meant to be impacted by what we were putting out would. And
Mhm.
in challenging myself every other episode, every couple of episodes to push the envelope a little bit. Some of the changes might be really noticeable if you go back and listen. Some of them are on the back end and you would know nothing about, but it would improve my process. It would improve the experience of my guests on the show because
Mhm.
I do aim to serve. I am providing a service to the people on my show, and the goal is always that they would want to come back in a heartbeat to be on the show again in the
Mhm.
future. And putting in my best possible effort each and every day and acknowledging myself for that and not making myself wrong for the times when I really fell on my face, I think was key. And then the
Yeah.
additional side of that is when I did have a win, acknowledge myself for that. Like,
Yeah.
hey, it was super, super stretchy for me to reach out to this person on LinkedIn in a cold DM who has no idea who I am and just say, hey, I admire you because of X, Y, and Z. This is my podcast. Would you like to be on it? And more often than not, those people would say no. But when they would say yes, really let that land that I was showing up in a
Yeah.
way that was conveying value to the world. And,
Yeah.
for every download milestone of 1,000 or 5,000, and we're going to do it big when we hit 10,000, little opportunities to celebrate the process along the way. Like, hey, somebody in Cambodia listened to us today. That's
Right?
exciting. Let's go. It was one person, but it doesn't matter. Like, I have this map that I'm always updating on my computer that I fill in every time there's a new state or a new country. And I
Yeah.
think we're up to like 25 countries, which is really awesome, by the way.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I never would have gotten to this point where I'm able to say that to you on this show if I hadn't just kept putting in the work and pushing
Right.
myself more and more each and every episode.
Yeah. Who is one of those people that you reached out to that it felt super stretchy that said yes? I don't want to throw those under the bus that said no. So we'll just go with the ones that said yes.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. So the folks, for the people listening to this who have been on the show, I mean, it stands to reason. Here's some free advice, by the way, to anybody wanting to start a podcast. Start with your network because I promise you, the people in your network have some pretty baller things to say. Doesn't matter how popular they are. Doesn't matter what their social media following is. Some of my most listened to episodes are people that are not on social media at all.
Mhm.
I think going back though to answer your question, the single biggest one, guy named Obi Stillwell,
Mhm.
episode 63, for those of you who want to go back and listen. Obi is an absolute behemoth of a man in terms of who he is in the world. Like, yes, he's a former Division 1 football player at Ohio State. He is a very large man, actually, but he is 100% the type of leader that I think a lot of people aspire to be. He is a community member that actually puts his money where his mouth is. He raises all types of money for charitable causes. He's
Mhm.
huge in the real estate game here in Columbus. He's on TV doing game breakdowns for Ohio State football. Super well connected guy. It was super intimidating to shoot him a cold DM and try to make it
Yeah.
happen. And he actually responded. And we had such an amazing time recording. To this day, it's one of my favorite episodes. And
Yeah.
I think one of the most impactful that we've done. And again, it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't just gone for it and
Right.
gotten
Because you
gotten
had
out of
met
my
him
comfort zone.
once. Yeah, you'd met him once in person.
So I actually sent him the DM first,
Oh,
and
gotcha.
then I went and met him in person. So to try to seal the deal, if I want
Yeah.
to be honest.
And it worked because he came on your show and he was a
It
great guest.
worked.
And he was
Yeah.
a generous guest.
Oh, very much so. Like
Yeah.
I really encourage the listeners to go back and listen. Again, it's episode 63.
Mhm.
He just came all the way from his soul with everything he was sharing, and you really get to know him and
Mhm.
walk away inspired. And you know, totally honest, other than yours, babe, when someone's asking me for an episode like, hey, I want to listen to your show, where should I start? His is one of them I send to people.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. I want to know, who was the person that you had on your show over these last 100 episodes that totally rocked your world, that just dropped truth bombs, that just threw out so much wisdom, so much knowledge, so much life experience that you walked away like, holy crap, that person just totally rocked my world? And you can't
Yeah.
say me.
Well, I mean, the audience has said you over and over again, but not counting you, I'm actually going to give you three,
Okay.
to really spread it out and try to show as much love as I can. The first one I'm going to say is Anita Gosal, um,
Mhm.
episode 61, I believe. Anita is a master practitioner of sacred geometry. And y'all, if you have any type of healing work to do, any type of introspective deep work to do, I highly recommend you listen to that episode. I
Mhm.
was, as the interviewer, on the edge of my seat the entire time, just because I felt like she was talking to my inner child the entire
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
And I think that so many of us have these big external goals that we don't actually entirely know why we want them.
Mhm.
And because of that, we're often pursuing things that aren't actually for us, they're for other people.
Mhm.
And this conversation with Anita, we get underneath that. And we talk a lot about internal healing, the do's and the don'ts. We talk a lot about what it actually means to do that type of work. And so that's a great one that
Mhm.
I suggest to people. Another great one, gonna talk about Brian Nandy. I don't remember the episode number, but Brian is a psychologist by training. Really amazing backstory of how he came to the United States. And the conversation, y'all, was entirely about hope and how to have hope in difficult times. And
Mhm. Mhm.
regardless of what's happening out in the world, everybody is fighting some type of battle that we know nothing about. And
Mhm.
it's just mind blowing how much the audacity to have hope
Mhm.
can directly change not only our mindsets and how we feel about ourselves, but also our outcomes out in the world.
Yeah.
And then the very last one I want to shout out is Steve Scanlon. Steve
Mhm.
is a masterful coach, with an amazing practice out in Portland, Oregon, and that was a great conversation, y'all. One of the more entertaining ones because we're talking about mindset. He's understands the neuroscience. He gets really deep on the neuroscience about our mindsets, but he's using Disney movies to explain them all. So super valuable conversation. We can all relate. I think most
Yeah.
of us have seen Inside Out at this point. Like we go
Mhm.
super deep on that movie. That's episode 86, another favorite of mine. I was just
Yeah.
engrossed interviewing him.
I love it. That's awesome. I can just imagine everybody quickly like scrolling back, highlighting the episodes that they need to go back and listen to if they're just joining. So,
and
okay.
we'll link them all in the show notes, everybody, so that you can, you know, once you're done listening to this conversation, you can click through and catch each of those as well.
You talk a lot about celebrating your wins and the momentum that it gives you, especially in those challenging times, right? Like discipline isn't momentum, motivation, that doesn't always last, but it's the
Right.
discipline that lasts. But to somebody like me, when I hear that, like the discipline of it, it immediately shuts me down, right? That sounds
Sure.
very rigid to me, and that's very much so a turn off for me. But you talk a lot about celebrating your wins in order to keep the momentum, to keep the motivation. Can you speak into that a little bit more? And like, what does that really look like? Because I think we get really hung up, like, what I'm like tripping over my own words here because this is like really true for me too. But like, what does it actually look like as somebody who tends to be hard on themselves? What does it actually look like to celebrate myself for the benchmarks? Right. Because we were just there, like we were having a conversation about my health and wellness, and I had lost 10 pounds and was not celebrating the 10 pounds because it's not where I want to be, right? And I think that I know I'm not alone in this. So how do you, when whether it's working with your clients or, in your own life or on your show, use those small wins, those small celebrations to really catapult you forward and reach that end line.
Yeah, so that's another beautiful question, and that one question is an entire podcast episode in
Yeah.
itself, but to do my best to do it justice with the time that we have, couple of things to break down that I think are critical here. So the first one is that motivation is always fleeting because it's
Mhm.
external. So it
Mhm.
is external to us. So it can be this person wronged me and I want to get them back, or I want to be able to pick my kids up, like blah blah blah, or whatever the thing is. Like
Mhm.
the high or the charge that we feel about things that are external to us are always going to be fleeting because our external circumstances are always changing, right?
Mhm.
Discipline is focused on the internal because we're in the driver's seat.
Mhm.
We are in control. And I think that where a lot of us go wrong is that we have an idea in our heads of what we should look like, what we
Mhm.
should be doing, or what our progress should look like in order for it to be valid or to be worthy
Yeah.
or to be.
Worthy of celebration.
Yeah, and oftentimes we're looking on Instagram or whatever social media platform, and we're comparing our square one or square two to somebody's square 150. you
Right.
know like if if you want to become the best basketball player you possibly could, please do not look at LeBron James, because that guy has hundreds of thousands of hours in, and God made him exactly perfect to play basketball, right?
You just can't compete with genetics.
No, no, no. To some degree, you definitely can't, right? But if, to use the basketball analogy, if you in this exact moment listening to this podcast decided you wanted to become the best basketball player you could, I would strongly suggest you find a league, maybe a rec league to get started, see how you did, get some additional coaching on the side, maybe hire somebody to help you work on your shot. Like, take it on day by day, and then keep acknowledging the fact that you are doing something for yourself, especially when it's uncomfortable or
Mhm.
awkward, or you feel any type of resistance. Like,
Mhm.
I know this basketball analogy is the one I chose, but like, think about going to the gym. So many people, it's such a mental hurdle just to show up to the gym.
Right.
Like, it's actually been proven to be advantageous to develop the habit of going to the gym, to just commit to going for 5 minutes for the first
Mhm.
2 weeks. So you show up, you're only there for 5 minutes, but you're getting in the habit of showing up, and you're normalizing being in that space where you're uncomfortable, where you feel awkward, where you may or may not feel like you're being judged by other people.
Mhm.
But by showing up to do it consistently, discipline, I'm doing this come hell or high water,
Mhm.
you start to rewire your brain to make this normal.
Mhm.
And again, where so many of us go wrong is that we have this preconceived idea of what we need to look like, or how it needs to go exactly,
Yeah.
in order for it to have any type of validity or anything like that. And because of that, we make ourselves wrong, and oftentimes we don't start.
Mhm. Mhm.
I know I've met so many people that want to become written authors, particularly in the fiction space, because they read Harry Potter growing up.
Right.
And then they're mad because they sit down to try to write a couple pages and they don't have the prosaic ability of J.K. Rowling. Like, she developed that over time, guys. And you can't get there yourself unless you put in the work.
Yeah.
And the very last thing I want to say about discipline, and I'm going to say it two different ways, but both get at the same thing, and I think they're very important. We treat discipline like a four-letter word.
Mhm.
We really do. It's like,
Like I just did.
yeah, I mean, but like even for me, I do it myself, full
Mhm.
disclosure. Like, the way I am set up in my life right now, if I don't get up by 5:30, 6 o'clock, I don't get to work out that day,
Mhm.
just because of the way my days are set up.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's not going to cut it if I'm going to accomplish my goal of running every half marathon in the state of Ohio, because I need to get my body in a specific level of shape.
Mhm.
Now, what I wanted to say about discipline, the two things. One, I once heard it said that, and this is for those of you who have a strong faith, you're actually doing a disservice to your relationship with God to not maximize the potential for which he created you.
Mhm.
And discipline is the key to getting there.
Mhm.
The other side of it, and this is not faith based, but I also think gets at the same thing. Your discipline with yourself is actually the highest form of self love,
Mm.
because we were talking about this. We stayed up a lot later last night than we wanted to, and ended up getting out of bed later today than we wanted to.
Mhm.
And, full disclosure, everybody, as we're recording this, it's like 6 degrees outside here in Columbus, Ohio. But like, there is a version of reality where I could have gone to bed on time, gotten up on time, bundled up, and gone for a
Mhm.
run, and it would have been
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
I took all of that off of the table because I didn't love myself enough in that moment to hold the boundary to
Mhm.
get myself to bed.
Mhm.
And so I understand what I just said can like spark a lot of things for a lot of people, but discipline actually is self-love.
Mhm.
It's the highest form of self-love. And
Mhm.
what I also want people to hear me say is if you are someone that struggles with self-discipline, and that is myself, that has been me my whole life. I've gotten a lot better. Don't make yourself wrong for that either, because all that is counterproductive. Celebrate yourself for showing up for yourself when you do, and that will rewire how you view yourself in the mirror as you build that credibility with yourself. And then the discipline gets easier over time.
Yeah. So how do you like what are the tangible ways for somebody to celebrate themselves? Because that seems like such just this broad, fleeting term, right? Celebrate yourself. And I think that's why it's so easy to ignore it. Like, how am I going to celebrate myself for the 10 pounds? Am I going to go get ice cream? Talk
Right,
about
right.
counterproductive, right? But like, how do you celebrate yourself in a way that really lets it land? And this is a conversation that you and I have frequently.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great research by a Harvard professor named Amy Cuddy. Um, she wrote a book called Presence, which is
Mhm.
excellent. It's all about this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. And in that book, she basically highlights, and then she has a TED talk that backs this up, but highlights that anything we want to feel, we can prime ourselves for by embodying it, like actually getting some movement involved. And so it sounds really corny, but actually doing like that little fist bump, like, heck yeah, I did the thing. Like,
Yeah.
yes, that actually in our subconscious allows us to feel the thing. So if we
Hmm.
are, and the same goes with negative emotions too. If we make emotion that we assign subconsciously to having a negative connotation, we'll feel something negatively too. And
Right.
so this is something that I've had enough practice with where I don't have to do the full like Michael Jordan fist pump anymore. Like, yes, like every time I go outside of my comfort zone or I hit a level of downloads on an episode or somebody says yes to being on my show, but I can just have a moment, take a deep breath, and I actually imagine my heart opening up
Hmm.
and I actually imagine the thing landing in my heart. Like,
Hmm.
I did this thing.
Yeah.
And it can be as small as I went to bed on time tonight. I'm going to wake up on time tomorrow to go for a run. Things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I love the idea of like physically celebrating yourself for the small wins because, like, what do you do when you achieve the big wins? You get
Yeah.
excited, jump up and down, you throw your hands in the air, you might scream, you call somebody and tell them, you do get really excited.
Yeah.
Like you go to like, I'll come to you and tell you something, you give me a big hug, like, what if we did that exact same thing when we celebrated our quote unquote small wins?
Yeah.
But like, what if we were so excited about our small wins as we were about our big wins? Because our brain doesn't know any different. Our body
Mm-mm.
doesn't know any different. It's like you can say something, as long as you're saying something in a really excited voice to your dog, they don't know what you're saying. You
Right.
say something like, you are such a pain in my butt. And I feel like you just are on my last nerve today. They don't know what you just said. They're just excited because you're talking to them in an excited voice, and they're probably going to run over to you wagging their tail and getting all up in your lap. And
Yeah.
our body, our brains, they don't know the difference either. They just know that we're excited. So they want to keep doing more of that same thing.
Yep. Yeah, and everything you just said is 100% true and perfect, and I'm super
Mhm.
glad you brought up our dogs as an analogy, and it's but it's true though because it's
Stu
the same.
totally does that to our dog too, just so you all know.
Yeah, I do. He drives me up a wall, ladies and gentlemen, but, you know, can't can't harp on this enough though. This only works if you don't judge yourself or make yourself wrong, and it goes
Mhm.
back to the comparison game, like,
Yeah.
I'm celebrating that we're at 2 years and we're at 5,000 downloads. I personally know people with podcasts that are at 2 years and at 50,000 downloads, right?
Yeah.
It would be super easy for me to make myself wrong about my 5,000, but
Mhm.
the key here is just allowing it to land that 5,000 times people raise their hands and said, "I want what you have to offer." And
Mhm.
that's worth celebrating.
Yes.
And so, whatever the measure of success is, and don't be afraid to make it as small as possible so that you can get in the habit of this.
Right.
Again, going back to showing up to the gym for 5 minutes, training ourselves to acknowledge ourselves is actually how we stop going through these roller coasters, these highs and lows of our emotions. And that's
Mhm.
actually how we just continue to soldier forward, doing the work we need to do every day towards our goals.
Right. So really what I'm hearing in all of this is simply start
Yes.
and being unattached to, what start looks like. It's what does start look like for you and creating your own benchmarks. And I think that that's your own benchmarks and your own measures of success. Like I'm not comparing myself to my mentor who has held dozens of retreats, has hosted retreats in Italy when I'm, here in Ohio, right? I'm not comparing myself to her. I'm comparing myself to where I am today because where I am today is this retreat was a sellout and this retreat was a sellout and then this one was too. And it doesn't matter where they were or what the price point was. It matters. These are my benchmarks. This is what I said that I was going to do. And then
Yeah.
also, wow, it would be so cool to do one in Italy one day.
Yeah.
Like, let it be the
Absolutely.
thing that guides you, that inspires you versus the thing that you use to beat yourself up.
Yeah. And like just to take it one step further to really land this for the audience,
Mhm.
would you have put on a retreat 5 years ago?
No.
Okay. How about 2 years ago?
No. No, because I think it was a glimmer. It
Yeah.
was a thought and I wasn't there.
Yeah. But like just by that measure of you really only running this race with yourself, you are
Right.
always winning as long as you keep yourself moving forward.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. I love that thought too. You're always winning as long as you keep yourself moving forward.
Yeah.
It's like, the thought that comes to my mind is like horse racing, right? Like they have the blinders on. They don't know unless they're looking at a horse's butt in front of them. Like they don't know what place they're in.
Right.
And if you're looking at a horse's butt in front of you, then, there might, that's another podcast episode, but they don't know what place they're in. They just know that they're in the race. They just know that they're running. For
Yeah.
all they know, they're winning and they've been lapped and they're actually in last place, but they don't know that. So, like, who are you comparing yourself to in this race?
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, we're
And
so smart. We know so many things. I'm just joking.
this is
Okay.
what happens, y'all, when two life coaches get married. And
This is what happens. It's so fun. So and then the two other things that I really heard is normalize and create habits out of your new routine. So like you talked about like going to the gym, like even if you just go for 5 minutes, what it take it's like removing a barrier. That's what I thought about when you talk specifically about going to the gym. It's so cold outside right now. I don't want to go anywhere. So if just going to the gym is a barrier for me, as is for a lot of people get very intimidated by the gym. So if just walking in the doors is the barrier, you can almost forget the rest. But if you've normalized so much walking in the door, then okay, at least you're there. Now we're just worried about the workout, right? And
Yeah.
so and then you begin to normalize that. Maybe you're only working out for
Yep.
15 minutes or 20 minutes. It doesn't mean that you have to walk in and do an hour of cardio, an hour of weights or whatever.
Right. Right.
So,
And I think that the point there, and that example is taken straight out of James Clear's book, Atomic
yeah,
Habits.
yeah,
It's the small incremental gains that
right.
are sustainable and habit forming. We
Hmm.
have a very all or nothing approach as a society. That's actually
Right,
why New Year's resolutions don't work. It's because we just assume we're going to flip a switch and suddenly we're going to be this super motivated person that's going to be in the gym every day at exactly
right.
5 a.m. And that's just not true. Like, we actually have all of this momentum going in the direction of who we've been based on the choices we've made. It actually takes time to get the momentum of our lives going in the direction we actually want. And
Right.
so, to your point, focusing on just showing up in that gym analogy, that's actually how you really move the needle on your life. And
Yeah.
so, for those of you in the Midwest right now where it's absolutely frigid as we're recording this, it might just be waking up at the specific time and getting
Hmm.
some type of movement in your home, because at
Yeah.
least then you're normalizing waking up at that time.
Hmm.
And then the rest is just details. Sure.
So this past weekend, I was actually at a retreat. It was a vision clarity retreat, and it was really excuse me, a very powerful experience for me. But one of my big takeaways was in this, you've spoken to this as well, is releasing the attachment of what you think it has to look like and welcome in what it looks like for you. So just it is not fun for me. I don't enjoy it. It feels intimidating. And at times it feels a little bit unsafe. I'm sure, women have experiences in gyms. That is a thing that happens. And so I personally am not knocking gyms. I'm just sharing my experience. That is such a barrier for me, right? I think I said like five things that's a barrier for me to get into the gym. But what actually works for me, what is going to, you know, what is going to remove the barrier, but also like how exciting to think about now I get to go play and all the different ways that I could get some healthy movement in. Like the thing I brought up was like aerial aerobics. That looks fun. Yoga with goats, sign me up, please. They even have like yogas with like sleeping puppies. Like I am all in. Or, they do pole dancing classes and it's fitness, or chair dancing and it's fitness. They're not meant to be sexualized, they're meant to be fitness, but also allow women to really feel confident and good in their body. Cycling, I don't remember if I just said that. There's all of these great, exciting ways that I can go out and get healthy movement, to get exercise. And how exciting is it to know that I don't have to do it the way that many people choose to and like to do it, but I can go do it in a way that really makes me excited, that's going to be fun, and that's just going to like remove barrier after barrier. And that was a really fun thing for me to realize this weekend, like, oh, wait a minute, all these things I can do, right? Like I can go kayaking, I can go paddleboarding. I can probably do 50 things and never one time step into a gym. And that is super exciting to me.
Yeah. And even to make a finer point out of what you just said, I'm an avid runner. We're married. Just because we're married doesn't mean that you have to become an avid runner either.
Oh,
And, we are truly on our own journeys, ladies and
yeah.
gentlemen, with ourselves, our goals, our dreams. And it doesn't have to look any particular way, even if the people we're closest to have a differing way for them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a half marathon you were training for, and there's a park by us that's called Antrim, and it goes around just this little man-made lake, and it's also a little wooded, and it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite places to go in the
Yeah.
fall and the spring. And I just wanted to move my body and be outside and get some sunshine on my face. And you were training for a marathon or a half marathon. And so we went out there and went opposite ways. And you were running, and I was just walking, just really enjoying my time. And we would high five each other along the way. And that was really fun to do.
Yeah. When it's no longer crazy cold, we need to do that again.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay. So I know it's probably about time to start wrapping up, but I do have a couple more questions. And the one is, who do you really want to get on your show? So actually, I'm going to make that a two-parter. Where you are right now, who feels like a super dreamy guest that you would love to have on your show right now? And then the second person would be, who would blow your mind by saying yes to being on your show? It could be
Wow.
anybody.
Wow. I don't want to totally cop out on the question, but I am always looking for people that are experts in their field, are somebody that has a really great story to tell that is directly related to personal development, improving oneself, helping others, and creating the lives of their dreams.
Yeah.
There are very few people in the world anymore that really blow me away every
Mhm.
single time I see them on social media or hear them speak. Somebody though that comes to mind is I would really love to have Jesse Itzler or Ed Milet
Mm,
on the show
yeah.
because
Now,
both
is
of
that
the
a blow your mind? Are they your
yeah.
blow your mind people? Because I'm gonna hold you to it for names, just so you know. You're welcome, listeners. So so Ed Milet, Jesse Itzler, those are your two blow my minds.
Yeah, because going back to comparison and
Mhm.
just being full disclosure, like we just spent the last 50-ish minutes talking about in part how the self comparison game is what holds us back. It's
Mhm.
also natural. You need to be paying attention to what you're comparing and whether you're making yourself wrong for what you're comparing yourself to.
Mhm.
But both of those guys occupy this same space, personal development, you know,
Mhm.
goals, achievement, all mindset, all those good things. They have such a profound way of expressing all of these complex concepts into
Mhm.
really short, super easy to digest nuggets. I would
Right.
love to have either of them on the show.
Yeah.
And
Well, and they walk the walk. Like
yes,
they have a story, but they also walk the walk. Like they're not, on stage. I don't know. I find we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but I think that there's people that we see in the personal development space and they are not showing up the same way in their own lives as they are
agreed.
when they're on the stage or on a podcast. And those two specifically, who we've seen, in person on stage, all of that. I remember meeting Ed Milet one time. He gave me the kindest hug. His speech was just so moving that I had a very emotional reaction to it. And he was just so loving and compassionate. And I really admired that about him. But these are two men that specifically they walk the walk. They preach it and they walk it, and they use their stories as momentum and motivation to help and inspire the next person. I always really love that about those two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a sports fan at heart. And while I know it wouldn't be right for me to just try to get a lot of my heroes on from when I was a kid
I mean,
necessarily,
it's your show. You can do whatever you want.
but I would love to get somebody like Steph Curry on the show.
Yeah.
because he, in my mind, is somebody that, while nobody is perfect, he doesn't have any real flaws. He's never been in trouble. He's not
Mm-hmm.
never had a controversy of any kind. He just
Yeah.
shows up, does his job, does it pretty joyfully, actually, and inspires and encourages, basketball fans of all ages. And
Mm-hmm.
I would love more than anything else to just have the opportunity to ask him the question. I'm sure there are things that you still feel like you want that you don't have, but how do you hold it all together as somebody who so many people considers to have it all?
Mm.
There's a lot of celebrities I could ask that question to, but as somebody that I personally look up to, which is crazy because we're basically the same age, that would be really special.
Yeah. Well, and, especially in light of what we're seeing on the news right now with the wildfires in California, and we're watching celebrity after celebrity who, and I know it's more than celebrities, that just tends to be who's being highlighted right now,
Correct.
that are losing everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's been a very sombering experience to watch them. And I just happened to see one. It happened to be of Jennifer Lopez, and she was like sorting through the rubble, and she picked up an award that she had won for something, and say what you want, but that woman worked really hard for that award, and now it's
Yeah.
gone.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so I guess I'm curious to ask you that question. So to those that look to you, how do you, with everything you've created, with everything you've achieved, with everything you have now, how do you kind of hold it all together?
I don't know what it says about me that I don't consider myself as having it all together, but what I do think is relevant, and this is something we said earlier in this episode, is that everybody's fighting a battle that the rest of us know nothing about.
Hmm.
And I think that the key to my success, having formerly been somebody who would let any circumstance take him off his game, right,
Hmm.
is having a decent foundation in faith, whatever that
Hmm.
looks like.
Hmm.
Not going to ascribe anything to anybody specifically, but knowing that there is a greater power that's bigger than us all, and that it's got your back if
Yeah.
you allow it to.
Yeah.
Additionally, surrounding myself with the right people and learning who those people are
Hmm.
versus, the people that I think are there for a good time but not a long time.
Hmm.
That's been the difference,
Yeah.
because there isn't a single person on this earth that has all the answers to everything.
Right.
I every single person I have ever interviewed on this show has always concluded, the second we're done recording, they say something like, "Was that okay?"
Yeah.
And I've had millionaires on the show. I've had published authors, like with legit publishing deals, on the show. I've had people who have won all types of athletic awards. I've
Hmm.
I've had some very successful people here. All of them have insecurities. All of them have things they're working on. I'm no different. But I
Yeah.
also hope that anybody hearing this knows that whatever you're dealing with, that's okay. Like, we're all working on ourselves as well.
Totally. Well, and just, to your point is when I asked that question, you said, "Oh, I don't know if I would ascribe myself as somebody who has it all together." But think back to a year ago or 2 years ago, you know, we every day we become this different version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so do the people that are maybe a few steps behind us, and so do the people that are maybe a few steps ahead of us. And you said something that I love that just really drives this point home is every guest that you've had after you hit stop recording, they say, "How did I do? Did I do okay?" And I remember watching
Every
an
single
interview,
one.
every single one. And I remember watching an interview with Lewis Howes, and he said the same thing.
Yep.
So just look at the space between like where you are now and where he is now. And it doesn't matter if you would look at yourself as I have it all together. Somebody looks at you and they're like, gosh, if I just had the courage to start that podcast like Stu did, right? Or whatever it may be, somebody is looking at you in that light.
Start hosting retreats like you.
Yeah. They're so fun. Okay.
Yeah.
One last question. Actually, two. If you were to be walking down the road and you were to meet 10-year-old Stu, and from that place, he had been watching the last 25 years of your life, what would he say to you?
Wow. What a question. I think he'd be disappointed that we didn't become NBA All-Stars, but but beyond that, I would like to think he'd be very proud
Yeah,
of, you know, the highs, the lows,
yeah.
everything in between,
Mhm.
because as somebody who historically has really struggled with self-confidence and has really struggled with even just liking the person he saw when he looked in the mirror,
Yeah.
it's been a heck of a journey.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a journey that's never completely at its end,
Mhm.
but the 35-year-old me is in a much better spot
Yeah.
than 20-year-old me was for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this quote I saw where it says there's two people that you should strive to impress, your 7-year-old version of yourself and your 70-year-old version of yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It
It
has
has been.
been. Now I'm gonna be asking to come do this again. When you have another milestone so I can come do this again. So before we totally wrap up, there's one question that has to be asked, and that is, what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Today I'm acknowledging myself for allowing myself to take the leap
Hmm.
of getting out of my own way, which really everybody was just the conversations I was having with myself in my own head about every possible reason I couldn't have a podcast, and just going for it and allowing myself to fail and getting back up and
Yeah.
trying again and just over and over and over again to get to this point.
Hmm.
And, you know, this is actually the longest I have stuck to anything continuously without some type of major break in my life. And
Hmm.
because of that, I know that I can do that with other things in my life as well.
Hmm.
And, I hope that anybody listening to this has picked up today, like, just get started.
Hmm.
You owe it to yourself to get started.
Hmm.
We don't know how much time we have on this earth.
Yeah.
You owe it to you and you owe it to the world. And if you feel so inclined, you owe it to your creator as well.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I love it. Thank you for letting me come on. And it's fun to have been a guest, but it's fun to also be the host. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to do this and just for sharing your wisdom and your heart and your knowledge and everything that you and these last 100 episodes have brought to the table.
Thank you also for being an amazing interviewer and for giving me this platform on my
Yeah.
own platform.
Of course. Let's see. We'll see if I do this right. So, everybody, thank you for tuning in to listen to us today. And if there's anything that you heard that you really think could resonate with somebody that you love, please, please feel free to send them this episode. Please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to. We are on literally all the platforms. And when I say we, I mean Stu. How did I do on that part?
You did pretty well. And
Did I
yeah,
miss
folks,
something?
cost of admission is always free. We will have all of the episodes referenced in this conversation linked in the show notes below. We will catch you next time with another amazing guest or message. We'll see you then.